The screams echoed through the metal corridors of the prison ship as another batch of prisoners was dragged to the feeding chambers. Death came slowly for most species when the Ravagers were hungry, but it always came. For 3,000 years, these towering beasts had swept across the galaxy like a plague of nightmares. Leaving nothing but ash and bones in their wake, Thane pressed his massive, clawed hand against the viewing port and watched the latest group of captives shuffle past. In chains. These new ones were different from the usual catch. They walked upright on two legs like many species, but their skin was a strange pale pink color that seemed almost translucent. No scales, no natural armor, no visible weapons of any kind. Their eyes were small and weak, set in soft faces that looked like they had never seen real violence. What system did we take these from? Thane asked his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Gorth who had fought in over 200 conquests. Third spiral arm, outer rim, they call their world Earth. Gorth spat green acid onto the floor, a sign of disgust among their kind. Took us less than 6 hours to break their defenses. Most pathetic resistance we have ever encountered. Thane studied the humans more closely. They were so small, barely reaching his chest even when he was crouched down. Their limbs looked fragile, like dried twigs that would snap under the slightest pressure. He had seen prey animals on dozens of worlds that looked more threatening than these creatures. How many did we capture? He asked. About 3,000 from their capital cities. The rest scattered like insects when our ships appeared. Gorth's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among the Ravagers. They surrendered so fast that some of our warriors did not even get to taste battle. The humans in the corridor moved with an odd calmness that bothered Thane. Most species wept or screamed or tried to fight even when bound in unbreakable chains. These creatures just walked forward with quiet dignity, as if they were going to work instead of to their deaths. One of them, a female with gray streaks in her brown hair, looked directly at him through the viewing port. Her eyes held no fear, only a cold intelligence that made him uncomfortable. "Commander Thane to the interrogation chambers," came a voice. Over the ship's communication system. "We have a translator ready." The interrogation room was a standard Ravager design, built to intimidate and break the will of prisoners. Spikes jutted from every surface, and the walls were stained with the blood of countless victims. In the center sat a single human female, the same one who had looked at him in the corridor. She was strapped to a metal chair that dwarfed her. Small frame, but she sat straight and calm as if she were attending a meeting. "State your name and function," Thane commanded in the universal trade language that most civilized species understood. "Dr. Hayes, xenobiologist," the human replied without hesitation. Her voice was steady and clear. "I study alien life forms. You will tell us about your species' weaknesses and military capabilities," Thane said, expecting the usual begging or defiance. Instead, the human smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You do not need to interrogate me for that information. I will tell you freely." Thane leaned back in surprise. In 3 millennia of conquest, no prisoner had ever offered to betray their own kind so easily. "Why would you do this?" "Because resistance is pointless," Hayes said simply. "Your species is clearly superior in every way. You are larger, stronger, faster, and better armed. You have conquered dozens of worlds while we have barely left our own system. Logic dictates that cooperation is our only path to survival." The answer satisfied Thane's expectations, but something in the human's tone made him suspicious. She spoke like someone reciting facts rather than someone broken by fear. "Tell me about your military." "We have no real military to speak of," Hayes replied. "Our weapons are primitive chemical propellants and small explosive devices. Our ships are slow and poorly armed. Our soldiers are untrained civilians who panic at the first sign of real combat. We spent more time fighting each other than preparing for external threats," Gorth snorted with contempt. "Sounds like every other weak species we have crushed. Why did your people fight among themselves instead of uniting against common threats?" Hayes looked directly at him with those unsettling eyes. "Because we are very good at killing each other. We have been doing it for our entire history. We know every possible way to destroy our own kind, and we have practiced extensively. That makes no sense, Thane said. If you are skilled at warfare, why did you surrender so quickly to us? Because we knew we could not win through direct confrontation, Hayes said. Your technology is centuries ahead of ours. Your individual warriors are far superior to our soldiers. Any attempt at resistance would have been suicide. The interrogation continued for hours, with Hayes providing detailed information about human biology, psychology, and social structures. She described a species that seemed almost designed for weakness. No natural weapons, poor senses, fragile bodies that could be injured by their own planet's environment. Yet something about her calm demeanor and the way she answered questions made Thane increasingly uneasy. You seem very calm for someone whose entire species has just been enslaved, he observed as Hayes tilted her head slightly. Fear is a luxury we cannot afford. When faced with extinction, intelligent beings adapt. Or die. We choose to adapt. Adapt to what? To you, she said simply. To your methods, your technology, your way of thinking. We are very good at learning from our enemies. It is how we survived on our own world for so long. Later, as Thane reviewed the interrogation records, he found himself troubled by the humans' responses. Every answer had been logical and consistent, yet he felt like he was missing something important. The humans were clearly weak and helpless, but their scientist had spoken with the confidence of someone who held a secret advantage. He dismissed the feeling as paranoia. The Ravagers had conquered 47 star systems and enslaved billions of beings. They were evolution's perfect predators, with natural weapons and armor that made them nearly invincible in combat. What possible threat could a species of weak, pink-skinned creatures pose to the galaxy's most successful conquerors? The thought would haunt him in the months to come, when the true nature of humanity's surrender became clear. But for now, Thane filed away the interrogation records and moved on to more pressing concerns. After all, there were always more worlds to conquer and more species to subjugate. The galaxy was vast, and the Ravagers were hungry for more than just food. They hungered for the sweet taste of absolute dominion over every living thing that dared to exist in their presence. The humans were just another meal, another conquest, another trophy to add to their collection. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake in their species' long and bloody history. The efficiency reports made no sense to anyone who understood how slave labor was supposed to work. In the vast manufacturing complexes of Terminus Prime, human work crews were not just meeting their quotas but exceeding them by massive margins. The weak little creatures who had surrendered without a fight were proving to be the most productive workers the Ravagers had ever captured. Rex stood in the observation tower overlooking Factory Complex 7, watching a team of humans assemble weapon components with precision that amazed even him. These beings had small, delicate hands that could work with tiny parts that Ravager claws could barely hold. Their movements were coordinated and efficient, with each worker knowing exactly what their teammates were doing without any apparent communication. Status report, he growled to his assistant, a young warrior named Tusk who had been assigned to monitor the human work gangs. Production is up 40% over last month, Tusk replied, consulting his datapad. The humans have suggested 17 improvements to the assembly process, all of which have increased efficiency. They work longer hours than any other slave species we have processed, Rex frowned. What about discipline problems? Escape attempts? Sabotage? None, sir. They follow all orders without question. They even police themselves when someone is not working hard enough. Tusk hesitated before adding, "It is almost like they want to be here." In the research laboratories, the picture was even more puzzling. Human scientists were cooperating with Ravager technicians to improve everything from weapon systems to starship engines. Dr. Hayes, the xenobiologist from the first interrogation, had become particularly valuable. Her suggestions had led to breakthrough improvements in cybernetic implants and biological enhancement procedures. The humans have a different way of thinking about problems, reported Chief Scientist Vex to the High Command. Where we use brute Force approaches, they find elegant solutions that use less energy and resources. Their knowledge of chemistry and material science is surprisingly advanced for such a primitive species. General Crix, who had initially wanted to simply eat all the humans, found himself grudgingly impressed by their contributions. What kind of improvements are we talking about? They redesigned our plasma cannon focusing arrays to increase range by 30%, Vex explained. They developed new hull alloys that are lighter but stronger than our current materials. Most importantly, they created improvements to our cybernetic implants that allow for better integration with organic tissue. The cybernetic improvements were particularly welcome. Ravager warriors had always struggled with rejection issues when mechanical parts were grafted onto their bodies. The human modifications seemed to solve these problems completely, allowing for a seamless integration between flesh and machine. What the Ravagers did not know was that every human contribution contained hidden elements that would serve a very different purpose than intended. The weapon improvements included microscopic circuits that could be activated remotely. The hull alloys contained trace elements that would become unstable under specific conditions. The cybernetic modifications carried tiny transmitters that could override the host's nervous system. In the prisoner quarters, the humans maintained their facade of grateful cooperation while secretly preparing for something the Ravagers could not imagine. They had been studying their captors with the same intensity that their captors had once studied them, learning every detail about Ravager biology, psychology, and technology. The implants are being distributed to frontline troops, whispered a human engineer named Davis during a brief moment when the surveillance systems had a blind spot. Almost 60% of their warrior class now carries our modifications. Hayes nodded grimly. The weapon systems are installed on 80% of their fleet. The navigation upgrades are in place on all capital ships. We are ahead of schedule. What about the signal? Asked another human, a former military communications specialist named Torres. Earth confirms that Admiral Stone's fleet is in position, Hayes replied. They have been waiting at the edge of the system for 2 months. The moment we activate the embedded systems, they will move in. The humans had learned something about their captors that the Ravagers had never realized about themselves. For all their physical superiority and technological advancement, the Ravagers were fundamentally simple thinkers. They understood direct confrontation, overwhelming force, and basic cause and effect relationships. They did not understand subtlety, long-term planning, or the concept of turning an enemy's strengths against them. Months passed, and the Ravagers grew more confident in their assessment of humanity. Here was a species that knew its place in the natural order. They were useful tools, nothing more. Their cooperation proved that they understood the futility of resistance against a superior race. The High Command even began to consider the humans as a model for how conquered species should behave. Unlike other races that required constant supervision and brutal punishment to maintain order, the humans seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity to serve their betters. Perhaps we should have conquered them years ago, mused Emperor Malik. During a council meeting, they are proving far more valuable than we anticipated. Indeed, agreed General Crix. We should consider seeking out more species like them. Weak enough to be no threat, but intelligent enough to be useful. The irony was lost on them completely. They had captured what they believed to be a helpless species, only to discover that these creatures were eager to help improve Ravager military technology. It seemed like the perfect outcome for a race of conquerors. In the depths of the prison complex, Dr. Hayes smiled as she made final adjustments to the last batch of cybernetic implants. These would be installed in the Emperor's personal guard next week, completing the network that would soon turn the Ravagers' greatest advantages into their ultimate weaknesses. The humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive against predators that were larger, stronger, and better armed than themselves. They had developed intelligence, cooperation, and the ability to use tools not just as advantages, but as force multipliers that could overcome any physical disadvantage. Now they were about to teach the galaxy's apex predators what it meant to be prey. The Ravagers thought they had won a great victory by capturing Earth. They had no idea that Earth had allowed itself to be captured as part of a strategy that would make their previous military conquests look like simple exercises. The trap was set, and the galaxy's most dangerous species was about to learn why humans had never needed claws or fangs to climb to the top of their food chain. The Festival of Domination was the most important celebration in Ravager culture, a time when the entire fleet gathered at their homeworld to display their conquered trophies and celebrate another year of galactic supremacy. Thousands of warships filled the space around Terminus Prime, their hulls gleaming with the symbols of defeated civilizations. Emperor Malak stood on the viewing platform of his flagship, the Devourer, watching the parade of captured beings that marched through the arena below. Representatives from 47 conquered worlds shuffled past in chains, their heads bowed in submission to their masters. The sight filled him with deep satisfaction, as it did every year. "The humans are performing exceptionally well," reported Admiral Kane, indicating a section of the arena where human prisoners were demonstrating their various skills. "They have increased productivity in all sectors by an average of 35%. "Good," Malik replied, his attention focused on the displays of military might surrounding the planet. "They know their place in the natural order. Unlike some species, they understand that resistance is futile." In the communication center of the Devourer, a routine transmission from the outer system was being processed by the ship's computer systems. The message appeared to be standard traffic control data, but embedded within its harmless code was a sequence of numbers that would change the course of galactic history. The signal reached every human-modified system simultaneously, transmitted through the microscopic components that had been carefully woven into Ravager technology over the past months. In weapon systems, navigation computers, life support networks, and cybernetic implants throughout the fleet, dormant programs suddenly activated. Admiral Stone's voice emerged from every speaker in the Ravager fleet, clear and calm despite the chaos it was about to unleash. "Operation Prometheus is a go. All units, execute immediate activation protocol." The first sign of trouble came from the navigation systems. Ships that had been maintaining perfect formation suddenly began drifting off course, their computers reporting false readings about their position and velocity. Pilots fought desperately with their controls, but the ships responded erratically. "Or not at all. What is happening?" roared General Crix as his command vessel lurched violently to one side, nearly colliding with a neighboring destroyer. Before anyone could answer, the weapon systems began their rebellion. Plasma cannons that should have been targeting empty space suddenly swiveled toward other Ravager ships. Missile launchers activated without orders, sending volleys of explosives into the heart of the fleet. The weapons that the humans had so helpfully improved were now turning against their owners with deadly precision. The cybernetic implants were the final horror. Ravager warriors throughout the fleet suddenly found themselves paralyzed as their own enhanced body parts turned against them. The neural interfaces that had given them improved reflexes and enhanced strength now flooded their minds with sensory overload, leaving them helpless and screaming. In the prison complex on Terminus Prime, the humans calmly began removing their restraints. The locks that had held them were products of human engineering, designed to open at the touch of concealed devices built into their clothing. The security cameras that had watched them were controlled by human-modified computers that now displayed peaceful scenes while the real action took place. Dr. Hayes walked through the corridors of the prison as if she owned the place, which in many ways she now did. The facility's life support systems, power grid, and communication networks all responded to her voice commands. The Ravagers had built their prison with human help, never realizing that their prisoners had been the architects of their own freedom. "Status?" "Report," she said into a communication device that had been hidden in her clothing for months. "Fleet-wide systems failure," came the reply from Torres, who had seized control of the communications center. "Navigation is compromised on 93% of vessels. Weapons are firing randomly on 78% of ships. Cybernetic implants are malfunctioning in approximately 60% of warriors. Hayes nodded with satisfaction. Begin. Phase 2, signal Admiral Stone that we are ready for the main event. The space around Terminus Prime was already filled with burning wreckage as Ravager ships continued to destroy each other through their compromised systems. The proud fleet that had gathered to celebrate conquest was tearing itself apart with its own weapons. Emperor Malak, his cybernetic implants sparking and failing, watched in horror as his empire crumbled before his eyes. The humans had done something that no military force in the galaxy had ever accomplished. They had turned the Ravager's greatest strengths against them. "How?" he gasped, his voice distorted by the failing electronics in his throat. Dr. Hayes appeared on his command bridge, having walked through security systems that recognized her as an authorized user. She was no longer the submissive prisoner he remembered from months ago. Her stance was confident, her voice steady, and her eyes held the cold intelligence of someone who had been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. "You made a fundamental error," she said, looking around the bridge at the Ravager officers who were struggling with their malfunctioning implants. "You assumed that surrender meant defeat. In human military history, surrender is often just another tactic." "Impossible," Malak snarled, trying to stand but finding his legs unresponsive. "We conquered your world. We captured your people. We broke your military." Hayes smiled, and the expression was not pleasant. "You conquered the cities we wanted you to conquer. You captured the people we wanted you to capture. You broke the military forces we wanted you to break. Everything you did was according to our plan." The truth hit Malak like a physical blow. "You let us win. We let you think you won," Hayes corrected. "There is a significant difference. While you were celebrating your easy victory, our real military was preparing for this moment. The humans you captured were not refugees. They were specialists, engineers, scientists, and technicians whose job was to study you and find ways to turn your advantages into weaknesses." Through the viewing ports, Malak could see new ships emerging from hyperspace. They were smaller than Ravager vessels, more elegant in design, and they moved with a coordination that spoke of centuries of tactical evolution. The human fleet had arrived, and they were not here to negotiate. "You are a species that relies on individual strength and overwhelming force," Hayes continued. "We are a species that learn to survive through cooperation and strategic thinking. You see enemies as obstacles to be crushed. We see enemies as problems to be solved." The human fleet spread through the system like a living thing, each ship working in perfect harmony with the others while maintaining individual unpredictability. They did not attack the crippled Ravager vessels. Instead, they simply took positions that made it clear that resistance would be futile. "What do you want?" Malak asked, his voice barely a whisper. Hayes looked out at the burning remnants of the Ravager fleet, then back at the defeated Emperor. "We want you to understand what you have unleashed. You thought you were conquering a weak species. Instead, you have awakened the galaxy's most dangerous predators." The massive blast doors of Research Station Alpha exploded inward as 20 Ravager shock troops stormed through the breach, their weapons charged and ready for slaughter. These were elite warriors, the best of their kind, equipped with the finest armor and cybernetic enhancements that their civilization could produce. They had come to reclaim what was theirs through the only method they understood: overwhelming violence. Bell crouched behind an overturned workbench. Her 11 remaining team members spread throughout the laboratory complex in positions they had prepared weeks ago. The humans had lost their technological advantage when the Ravagers began using purely mechanical systems, but they had not lost their ability to adapt to impossible situations. "They think they can intimidate us with their size and weapons," she whispered into her communication device. "Let them learn what happens when predators invade the territory of something that evolved to survive predators." The first Ravager warrior to enter the main laboratory never saw the trap that killed him. The floor beneath his feet gave way, dropping him into a pit filled with industrial acid from the station's waste processing system. His armor, designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles, offered no protection against the chemical bath that dissolved flesh and metal alike. The others learned caution quickly. But caution was exactly what the humans wanted. Every second the Ravagers spent being careful was a second the humans could use to prepare their next surprise. The laboratory complex had become a maze of death, with every corridor and room transformed into a weapon against the invaders. Motion sensors indicate they are moving toward the central core, reported Davis from his position in the ventilation system. They are bunching up, just like we predicted. Perfect, Bell replied. Execute Gamma Protocol. The atmospheric processors throughout the station suddenly began pumping a mixture of gases that were harmless to humans but toxic to Ravager physiology. The aliens found themselves choking and disoriented, their enhanced senses becoming liabilities as their nervous systems overloaded from the chemical assault. But the Ravagers were warriors, bred for battle and trained to fight through pain and adversity. They pressed forward despite the poisonous atmosphere, their weapons sweeping back and forth as they searched for targets. Their thermal sensors showed human heat signatures moving through the walls and ceiling, but the prey seemed to vanish whenever they tried to target them. "Cowards!" snarled Commander Thorne, the leader of the assault team. "They hide in the shadows like insects. When we find them, we will tear them apart slowly." His words were picked up by the station's communication system and broadcast to every human defender. Instead of fear, the response was quiet laughter. These creatures had spent months studying Ravager psychology, learning that their captors were driven by pride, anger, and the need to prove their superiority through direct confrontation. "Let them come," Bell said calmly. "We have a few more lessons to teach them." The next trap was triggered when the Ravagers reached the central corridor. The artificial gravity generators that kept everyone walking on the floor suddenly reversed their polarity, sending the heavy warriors flying toward the ceiling at crushing speed. Their armor, designed to protect them from external attacks, became a liability when they were slammed into metal surfaces at lethal velocity. 3 Ravagers died instantly from the impact. The others managed to anchor themselves to the walls. But now they were fighting upside down in a disorienting environment where up and down had no meaning. The humans, who had been expecting this change, moved through the altered gravity field with practiced ease. "This is impossible," growled one of the surviving warriors. "How can these weak creatures fight us in our own environment?" The answer came from Torres, who had been monitoring the battle from the communications center. "Because this is not your environment anymore. This is our environment. Every system in this station has been modified to serve our purposes. You are not fighting us in your territory. You are fighting us in ours." The truth was even more disturbing than the Ravagers realized. The humans had not just booby-trapped the station. They had turned it into a living weapon that responded to their commands and anticipated their needs. Every sensor, every control system, every piece of equipment had been reprogrammed to serve the defenders instead of the invaders. When the Ravagers tried to use the station's own systems against the humans, they found that the computers no longer recognized their authority. Door controls locked them out. Environmental systems ignored their commands. Even the lights began flashing in patterns that disrupted their vision and made it impossible to aim accurately. "We are being hunted," one of the warriors said, his voice tinged with a fear that no Ravager had felt in centuries. "They are using the station itself as a weapon against us." Commander Thorne refused to accept what his own senses were telling him. "They are just animals. We are the superior species. We will crush them through sheer force." But force was useless against an enemy that refused to engage in direct combat. The humans struck from unexpected angles, using makeshift weapons and improvised traps that turned the station's own infrastructure against the invaders. They moved through maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts like ghosts, appearing only long enough to strike before vanishing into the mechanical maze that they had made their home. The Ravagers found themselves fighting not just 12 humans, but the entire station. Every surface could conceal a threat. Every system could be turned against them. The environment itself had become hostile, responding to human commands while ignoring Ravager attempts to regain control. Hours passed, and the number of surviving Ravagers continued to dwindle. These were warriors who had conquered worlds, but they had never faced an enemy that could turn their own advantages against them. Their strength became a liability in the altered gravity fields. Their size made them easy targets in the narrow corridors. Their advanced weapons were useless against enemies who attacked from within the walls themselves. "Retreat," Commander Thorne finally ordered, his voice breaking with the strain of admitting defeat. "We need reinforcements." But the humans were not finished with their lesson. The blast doors that had allowed the Ravagers to enter the station suddenly sealed shut, trapping the survivors inside. The station's communication systems began broadcasting a message that would be heard throughout the Ravager fleet. "This is Bell of the Human Resistance," the voice said calmly. "We have just demonstrated what happens when you try to fight us on our terms. Your warriors are brave and strong, but they are not prepared for the kind of warfare that we learned from fighting each other for thousands of years." The message continued, describing in detail how the humans had turned every aspect of the station against its invaders. They had used psychology, engineering, and tactical thinking to transform a research facility into a death trap that had consumed an elite Ravager assault team. "You have spent centuries conquering species that fight the way you fight," Bell concluded. "We are not those species. We are the species that learn to win wars not through strength, but through making our enemies defeat themselves." The few surviving Ravagers found themselves prisoners in the station they had come to reclaim. They were not mistreated, but they were constantly reminded that they were now in a world where their physical superiority meant nothing. The humans had created an environment where intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation were the only advantages that mattered. The psychological impact of the defeat rippled through the Ravager fleet. For the first time in their species' history, they had encountered prey that could hunt them. The darkness between stars had never seen anything like the formation that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Terminus system. The human fleet moved with a precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics, each vessel maintaining perfect coordination with its neighbors while following flight patterns that appeared random to outside observers. Admiral Torres watched the tactical display from the bridge of the flagship Liberty, her expression calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The Ravagers had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, but their empire was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object that had learned to move. "Fleet status report," she commanded. "All vessels report." "Ready for combat operations?" came the reply from her communications officer. "The Ravager fleet is in disarray from the system infiltration, but they still outnumber us 3-1. Torres nodded. The numbers meant nothing in a conflict where traditional thinking no longer applied. The humans had not come here to fight a conventional battle. They had come to demonstrate the difference between a species that had evolved to dominate and a species that had evolved to survive. "Begin the approach," she ordered. "Remember, we are not here to destroy them. We are here to replace them." The human ships began their advance, moving in a pattern that looked chaotic to Ravager observers but was actually a complex dance of mutual support and tactical flexibility. Each vessel was capable of independent action while remaining part of a larger organism that could adapt to any situation. Emperor Malak, his cybernetic implants now completely dead, watched the approaching fleet from his crippled flagship. The humans had given him basic life support and communications, but nothing else. He was a prisoner in his own command center, forced to watch as his empire crumbled around him. "They move like a single creature," observed General Crix, his voice filled with something the Ravagers had never experienced before, genuine fear. "How can they coordinate so perfectly without central control?" The answer came from Dr. Hayes, who had remained on the bridge to witness the final act of humanity's conquest. "Because we learned long ago that true strength comes not from individual power, but from the ability to work together toward common goals. Your species conquers through domination. Ours survives through cooperation." The Battle of Terminus Prime began not with a massive exchange of weapons fire, but with something far more terrifying: surgical precision. The human fleet did not attack the Ravager ships so much as they disabled them with movements that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver. "They are not targeting our weapons," reported a Ravager tactical officer. "They are targeting our engines and navigation systems. They want to capture us alive." The realization sent a shiver of dread through the Ravager command structure. In their culture, death in battle was preferable to capture and subjugation, but the humans were not giving them the option of a glorious death. They were being systematically paralyzed and collected like specimens. "How are they doing this?" demanded Malik. "Our ships are faster and more heavily armed. We have numerical superiority. We should be able to overwhelm them through sheer force." Hayes smiled at the question. "You are thinking like Ravagers. We are fighting like humans. Your ships are faster in a straight line, but our ships can change direction instantly. Your weapons are more powerful, but ours are more accurate. Your numbers are greater, but our coordination is perfect." The human fleet demonstrated their advantages with movements that seemed to violate the basic principles of space combat. They used gravitational fields as weapons, turning stars and planets into slingshots that accelerated their vessels to impossible speeds. They fought in 3 dimensions while the Ravagers were still thinking in terms of traditional naval warfare. "They are using the system itself as a weapon," observed one of the Ravager commanders. "They are not just fighting in space. They are fighting with space." The truth was even more remarkable than the Ravagers realized. The humans had spent months studying the Terminus system, learning the location of every asteroid, every gravitational anomaly, every source of radiation or electromagnetic interference. They had turned the entire star system into a weapon designed specifically to counter Ravager tactics. When Ravager ships tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by precisely placed obstacles that had been moved into position weeks ago. When they tried to regroup, they discovered that their formations were being disrupted by gravitational fields that the humans had learned to predict and exploit. "This is not warfare," said General Crix. "This is something else entirely." "This is evolution," Hayes replied. "You conquered the galaxy by being the biggest and strongest predators. We are about to take it from you by being the smartest." The battle lasted exactly 14 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Ravagers, despite their individual superiority and technological advantages, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. They were fighting an enemy that had learned to turn every advantage into a disadvantage and every strength into a weakness. "Surrender," Admiral Torres broadcast to the remnants of the Ravager fleet. "You have fought bravely, but you are no longer the apex predators of this galaxy. That position now belongs to us." Emperor Malak, his empire in ruins around him, asked the question that would haunt his species for generations to come. "What are you going to do with us?" Torres looked at him with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the battle. "We are going to do what we have always done. We are going to adapt you to serve our purposes. Some of you will be warriors, fighting for us instead of against us. Others will be workers, building the infrastructure of our new galactic civilization. All of you will be given the chance to find a place in the new order. And if we refuse, then you will be eliminated," Torres said simply. "Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The galaxy has no room for species that cannot adapt to changing circumstances." The message was broadcast throughout the galaxy, reaching every world that had once bowed to Ravager authority. The empire that had ruled through fear and intimidation was dead. In its place rose something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that ruled through intelligence, cooperation, and the terrifying ability to turn any situation to their advantage. Within weeks, the galactic order that had existed for millennia began to crumble. Some worlds surrendered immediately upon learning of the Ravagers' defeat, their leaders smart enough to recognize that resistance against humanity would be futile. Others attempted to fight, only to discover that the humans had learned from every previous conquest in galactic history. The species that had seemed so weak and helpless when they first arrived as prisoners had revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous than any apex predator. They were apex adapters, capable of surviving and thriving in any environment by learning to use that environment's own rules against its previous masters. We underestimated them completely, admitted Dr. Vex, the former chief scientist of the Ravager Empire, as he was processed at a human reintegration facility. We thought strength meant superiority. We thought conquest meant victory. We never understood that true power comes from the ability to make your enemies destroy themselves. The humans established their new galactic government not through military occupation, but through something much more effective. They made themselves indispensable. Their technology, their organizational skills, and their ability to solve complex problems became the foundation of a new civilization that offered prosperity and stability to species that had known only terror under Ravager rule, the former. Prisoners who had once shuffled through the corridors of Ravager ships in chains now walked through the halls of power as administrators, scientists, and leaders of the new galactic order. They had not conquered the galaxy through violence, but through patience, planning, and the simple recognition that every system could be improved if you understood how it really worked. Emperor Melak, now confined to a comfortable but secure facility on a human-controlled world, spent his remaining years trying to understand how his species had fallen so completely. The answer, when it finally came to him, was both simple and terrifying. They never stopped being predators, he said to his human caretaker, a former prisoner named Chun who had once cleaned the floors of his throne room. They just learned to hunt prey that was bigger and stronger than themselves. We taught them everything they needed to know about us, and they used that knowledge to make us extinct. Chun nodded sympathetically. That is what humans do. We adapt, we learn, we survive. Your species spent 3,000 years perfecting the art of conquest. We spent 50,000 years perfecting the art of not being conquered. In the end, that was the more useful skill. The galaxy settled into its new rhythm under human leadership. The constant warfare that had characterized the Ravager era gave way to a period of unprecedented cooperation and technological advancement. Species that had been enemies for generations found themselves working together on projects that benefited everyone. The humans had not just replaced the Ravagers as the galaxy's dominant species. They had replaced the entire concept of dominance with something that worked better: partnership. They had proven that the strongest predator was not necessarily the one with the biggest teeth and claws, but the one that could convince all the other predators to work together. Years later, when young humans asked their elders how they had managed to defeat an enemy that seemed so superior in every measurable way, the answer was always the same. They had done what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. They had refused to accept that the odds were impossible. The Ravagers had made one critical mistake in their 3,000-year reign of terror. They had assumed that the universe operated according to their rules. The humans had taught them that the universe operated according to whoever was smart enough to understand its real rules and adaptable enough to use them. The galaxy had new apex predators, and they ruled not through fear, but through the much more terrifying prospect of making resistance seem pointless. They had won not by being stronger than their enemies, but by being better at the game than anyone else had ever imagined possible. In the end, the species that had climbed to the top of every food chain on their home planet through intelligence, cooperation, and stubborn refusal to give up had done the same thing on a galactic scale. They had not just survived their encounter with the galaxy's deadliest species, they had made that species extinct and taken their place as the new definition of what it meant to be dangerous.